Brother Dillard, are you ready?
Yes.
Let's go.
Good afternoon. My name is Jesse Dillard. I'm the voter registration chair for the Epsilon Xi chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I'd like to welcome you to our program, Know Your Ballot. Our aim in this program is to inform you of propositions 14 through 25 on this year's ballot. We're honored to have with us today Dr. Flojan Kofer, Senior Director of Policy with Public Health Advocates. Dr. Kofer will be presenting on measures 14 through 25 this evening. We're also very honored to have with us Brother Kwame Dow. Brother Dow is the 12th District Representative of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Brother Dow will be presenting on the importance of voting. We want to encourage everybody to be safe during this election process. We want to remind people to wear your mask, try to be 6 feet from one another, and if you can, bring your own writing utensil when you go to the polls. At this point in our program, I would like to turn it over to Brother Dow. Brother Dow, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Dillard. Thank you very much. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me just fine. All right. Well, good evening and welcome. I want to thank you all for taking a moment out of your Monday really to tune into this forum. Since 1911, the men of Omega Psi Phi have been at the forefront of ensuring that those in our community have the critical information that they need to make the decisions that are best for themselves, their families, their friends, and certainly their neighbors. Tonight, we'll be doing just this, providing critical information for the propositions that will be on the 2020 ballot, as well as measures on the California ballot here on November 3rd. Here in the 12th district, which is made up of the 10 states in the West, including California, we are working very hard to make sure that we bring this critical information to our communities on a regular basis. It's truly fundamental in terms of the work that we're doing. While there's been a great deal of conversation, particularly around this election, we want to make sure that the focus is not just on the presidential elections, but really the focus is on all elections. We want to make sure that you have the critical information that you need to be active participants in that. I'd like to thank the Brothers of Epsilon Xi chapter, the Capital City Qs, for bringing this forum forward tonight. Dr. Kaufman, I'm looking forward to working with you this evening, as well as the moderators. The importance of voting. I can't over speak on the importance of voting. I always like to tell people, if it wasn't important, they wouldn't be trying so hard to stop you from voting. If it wasn't important, they wouldn't be spending billions of dollars to make sure that you lean a certain way or don't lean a certain way. So it's absolutely critical that you participate in the system. I've heard people say that, no one died for you to vote. I disagree with that. In fact, we've been working on a Get Out the Vote campaign over the last number of months, and we had a young man contribute to his story to our campaign. He's actually the same age that Emmett Till would have been. And he said that I vote because Emmett Till can't vote. I spoke to a young man a few weeks ago who had no intention on voting in this particular election until he saw some of the things that we were putting out there in terms of why you should be voting, that it's more important than just the presidential election. We're talking about the Supreme Court. We're talking about district judges. We're talking about those people who are making decisions in your community right now. And he sent me a video the other day of him actually dropping his ballot into the box. And he said, I just want to let you know that the work that you've done, that you guys have been doing, has actually changed my mind as it relates to voting. I say all that to say, we have to be participants in this process. If you don't participate, then you can't complain. And the brothers that know me, I won't say that I love to complain, but I want to make sure that I can't complain. So we'll certainly be voting, and we invite you all to vote with us this November 3rd. Brothers, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brother Dow, for your remarks on the importance of voting. It's highly critical that we do vote this election and make your vote count. At this point in our program, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Kofer. I want to remind everybody that we are allowing people to ask questions via our chat. So if you have a question while Dr. Kofer is going through the different measures, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of Dr. Kofer's presentation. Dr. Kofer, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you first and foremost to the men of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity for putting this forum on and for inviting me to participate. I really appreciate the invitation and certainly the spirit of what you are attempting to do tonight. Just a little bit about me. I'm an epidemiologist by training. I also serve as the Senior Director of Policy for Public Health Advocates. And so one of the things that I have been working on since 2014 is I work with Black Women Organized for Political Action, as well as the Sacramento Sister Circle. And we put together a voter guide, and we actually just launched our voter guide this weekend. And I love to let people know about the voter guide because we walk through most of the things that'll be on your ballot, especially if you happen to live in the city of Sacramento. But our guide goes pretty far and wide. We're actually having our launch of the guide officially on Thursday with Assemblymember Dr. Shirley Weber. And we have a longstanding partnership with State Senator Holly Mitchell because we go through the entire guide from top to bottom and give you our Black, woman's perspective on what's on the ballot, what the equity issues are, how this fits in, and it's written in our language with our, snarky commentary and our sort of at times even, irreverent takes on this. And we think it's really important, and I just want to encourage people to make your own voter guides. We shouldn't be the only game in town. There's always an opportunity for you to share with other people because a lot of people are trying to figure this out. And so if you happen to live in another community that's outside of Sacramento, please feel free to do, as you do your research, share. This literally started as a Google Doc because people were asking, well, who are you voting for this? And what are you voting for that? So I just wanted to encourage you that this is something that can take place there. My organization also is supporting many of the ballot initiatives that we'll be talking about tonight. And so I think it's important to think about this from a public health as well as from an equity lens. So when we go to Prop 14, which is the first one on your ballot, and it is essentially for bonds for continuing stem cell research. And so this would, there's already a public fund that exists to fund stem cell research. The goal here is to continue that as well as to improve patient access and affordability for stem cell treatment. It sounds like a lot of money when you think about this bond, but it actually really only amounts to about $5 per person annually for people in the state of California. And one of the major complaints about this is that thus far it hasn't actually generated a lot of revenue from all of the things that it's already produced. But I would argue that, to date, there are 2,900 medical discoveries that have come out of this fund and 92 clinical trials. And so that's no small feat in terms of what we've been able to learn and the way that that's been able to advance our understanding of medicine. And in particular, we live in a capitalistic society. And so we often, tend to value things based on their return on investment. But sometimes the return on investment isn't always financial. The goal here really is to support independent medical research. And that's something that, we really feel strongly that public dollars should be used for because the benefits are far reaching. And because we don't want the only research to be done by private industries that have their own, slant on what they decide to study, as well as how they interpret the results. We really do want research to be able to be done independent of political or even, financial interest. And so this is a great way to be able to invest in that. If we go to then Prop 15, this is essentially what I've been calling this is sort of making the wealthy businesses pay their property taxes finally, because this is actually a tax on commercial and industrial properties, and the revenue of which will go to education and local government funding. And so usually we'd be pretty skeptical about something giving money to local governments because there's a notorious mishandling of funds by places like Sacramento County. I don't know how many of you all know about some of the things that have happened in the county, but the county lied about not having the mental health money that came from Proposition 63, which is the Mental Health Services Act. They also the county received $181 million in coronavirus relief funds. and they spent over 120 million of it on the sheriff and probation, and then tried to hide it. So yes, we're always kind of skeptical when you say things are going to go to local governments, because sometimes they don't always spend the money well. You know, the race to the bottom is real, but this proposition is actually an important step in the long process of closing some of those corporate loopholes. You know, currently our tax revenue is regressive. And what that means is that those of us with lower incomes contribute substantially higher percentages of our money to supporting the public infrastructure and to services through income, sales, and property taxes. That doesn't mean that we contribute more like literally in numbers, but it means that as a percentage of the money that we bring in, we contribute more. And so this is actually, this proposition actually requires that those high value businesses that are valued at over $3 million pay their fair share of taxes to support the schools and local governments. And the breakdown of the money is that 60% will go to local governments and 40% will go to schools and universities. And really, you know, all I can say is it's about time, because we've largely been funding that through our individual contributions. And now it's time to actually require that our businesses also contribute. And I think the last thing I would use as an example for this is that it makes no sense that high value businesses like Disneyland, for example, don't pay their fair share. So this is really trying to right that historic wrong of having us pay more than some of the very profitable businesses that are high value and that exist within the state of California. So then, if we move to Prop 16, this is actually the repeal of Prop 209 from 1996, which basically put a ban on affirmative action in the state of California. And so this would allow diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. The truth is we've always had to legislate the full humanity of Black people in this country, in part because, you know, it's neither guaranteed nor assumed. And so we can't leave it to, you know, the dominant society to be able to do the right thing when, you know, that's the same society that intentionally and systematically dehumanized, attacked, sabotaged, you know, Black people, and has continued to do so for many years. And so Prop 209 was passed in 1996, as I mentioned, and it was really just this kind of misguided attempt to embrace this false notion of a post-racial society. And I describe it as misguided because it was framed as a step toward equality that ignored our foundational need to achieve equity or restorative justice first. And so in the past 24 years, the results have been really devastating. You know, there have been a loss of, if you look at the minority business enterprises, the loss there is over $500 million per year, in particular to Black businesses. And so a yes on Prop 16 will restore both fair and equitable access and accountability metrics, specifically in the areas of higher education, government contracting, for businesses as well. And so the bottom line here really is that race is a factor because racism is a factor, and ignoring the problem of racism does not make it go away. And so now, you know, this is a time for us to be able to, again, right this historic wrong from 24 years ago and actually make it so that we are doing true equity work by thinking about the ways in which we have, as a community, been disenfranchised by the political process and by the policies that have been passed, and actually doing something to immediately redress. So then that brings us to Prop.
Can I just let everyone know that if you have a question about any one of the propositions, go ahead and type it in the chat box, and at the end there's about 10 minutes for Dr. Kofor to answer any of those questions.
Yep. And can I see the chat, or is it only private?
It's private. I'll read the questions.
Perfect. Okay. Wonderful. I was kind of trying to keep an eye out for chat questions, so I'll just keep going for now, and then we can do it at the end. Okay. So then Prop 17. So Prop 17 restores parolee voting rights. And basically what this would do would be to amend the state constitution to restore the rights of people who are on parole for felony convictions in California. As many of you are probably aware, Black people are disproportionately represented in the criminal legal system. We call it the criminal legal system and not justice system because it doesn't always you know, achieve justice. And so restoring voting rights of people upon their release from prison would greatly impact and put power of the vote into many, you know, of our fellow Californians. And this also would combat felony disenfranchisement. It's really important that we don't have collateral consequences to criminal convictions, because it reinforces this notion that there's no way of having been able to pay your debts to society. And also, there's actually evidence that when we don't bring people back in and allow them to be able to make decisions about their lives, it significantly increases recidivism, which is when people then end up going back to jail or prison. And as I'm sure many of you on this Zoom know, the United States is one of the most punitive nations regarding disenfranchisement for criminal convictions. And so this is an opportunity for us to actually allow people to be able to restore one of the key votes, or the key rights that we have, which is that right to vote. And so, yes, we are definitely saying yes on this proposition. So then Prop 18 is the right to vote in a primary if you turn 18 before the general election. And so this would basically allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the next general election to vote in the primary and special elections. And the whole goal here is basically that primaries are really closely tied to the general election. In fact, right now, if you live in the city of Sacramento, for example, you're not going to be voting on your city council member for District 4 or your mayor, because that was decided in the primary. In addition, because we have statewide, the top two vote getters from the primary are the ones that go on to the general election. It means that you don't actually get to decide who is going to be on your ballot in November. And so the way that this would work is that if the primary was in March, and let's say you were 17 and your birthday was sometime in June or July, you would be allowed to vote in March during that election, because you would then be 18 by the time you reached the November election. And so this is a really great thing for multiple reasons. It engages young people in the electoral process earlier. And, youth are really galvanized right now to fight for more equitable world. There also is a partisan lens to this as well, which is that, young new voters in California register overwhelmingly as Democrat or no party preference, which is often very left-leaning. And so this actually could, impact elections by engaging young progressive voters really early, and helping to be able to pass some of the policies that in the past have been really challenging to pass, especially when it comes to some of the more progressive ideas that we've tried to move forward in California. So then there's Prop 19, and Prop 19 is for property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for wildfire agencies and counties. This is the one that I'm jokingly saying, let your grandparents and Uncle Percy move, because this initiative basically lets some homeowners, those who are over 55 or people with severe disabilities, keep their lower tax rate when they sell their home. You may be aware that in the state of California, your property tax is locked in when you purchase it, so that you basically have a fixed, cost of living in your home for the rest of the time that you own it. The challenge, and so it's not based on actual market value. So even if your house goes up significantly in cost, your property tax rate stays the same. So the reason why this is really important is because if you ever want to sell your home, you now risk having higher property taxes based on the current market value. And so people who are older or have disabilities are often on fixed incomes. And so that makes the cost of these new houses prohibitively expensive. And so sometimes that means that people end up staying in their homes, sometimes even when their homes no longer meet their accessibility needs. Maybe they're multiple floors or don't have ramps and things like that as people are aging, or they just like to be closer to family as they age, so they stay because they can't afford the higher tax bill if they move. And so this would actually close that gap so that people could move a few times and take the tax break with them. They could even apply the tax break to a more expensive property. And that's incredibly important because the cost of, that home that they're living in has gone up, but so has maybe a comparable house that they're interested in purchasing. So they'd be able to transfer that. But importantly, it also stops a tax break that Californians sometimes receive on inherited homes from parents and grandparents. And so basically what what it means is that if somebody in your family passes the house down to you and you don't live in it, you no longer pay the lower tax rate. You now would pay you would pay for that sort of as a luxury because it's not your primary residence, which makes a lot of sense because we shouldn't be offering tax breaks for people to have multiple homes when we have a severe housing and homelessness issue in the state. Obviously realtors like this measure because it can lead to more homes being sold. But one of the big reasons to support it is because, again, it allows for people to be able to move and to be able to meet their needs. It also allows for people who may have lost their homes in wildfires, and let's say the insurance settlement comes in, again, for them to keep that same tax rate when they go to look for new homes because their homes are no longer there. And so part of the reason why why this has been somewhat controversial, I think, is because people are concerned that the realtors are in support of it and that there must be some sort of additional like loophole to it. The real reason they're in support is just because when people sell homes, they can make more money. And so this is one of those times where interestingly enough, the interests sometimes can align. And then there's Prop 20. And so this is an attempt to repeal Prop 47 from 2014 and to increase DNA collection. And so we, in 2014, Prop 47 was passed. And what it did was it turned low-level, what are called wobbler felonies. So depending on what judge you got, and depending on what the district attorney decided to charge you with, the same exact charge could either be charged as a felony or as a misdemeanor. And the data showed that if you were Black or brown or indigenous or low income, you were much more likely to be charged with the felony. And if you were white or more affluent, you were much more likely to be charged with the misdemeanor. And so that took that discretion out and downgraded all of those charges to misdemeanors. And so they were nonviolent and non-sexual charges. And so this particular bill would be basically going back to overturn that and to make those now felonies. But it's really in the public's interest to have fewer people in jails and prisons and to protect individual privacy. And so this prop would roll back some of those common sense provisions that Californians already passed in 2014 that were in an attempt to limit harsh felony penalties for nonviolent and non-sexual crimes, as well as in 2016 when Prop 57 was passed to make nonviolent felonies eligible for release after completing the sentence of the primary crime. So sometimes people are charged with two crimes and there's a primary crime and then there are like secondary charges that are added on. And so in order to be able to reduce prison crowding, Prop 57 made it so that if you had a nonviolent felony, you would be eligible for release after completing the sentence for your primary crime. And this would also then allow police to be able to collect DNA for certain misdemeanors. And so that's a really scary proposition to have, that we're collecting more DNA because of the way in which it allows, there's not a lot of regulation on what can be done with that. And so there's a significant need, especially in this day and age, to protect our privacy. And that privacy needs to extend also to our biospecimens in particular, because of the way that that could potentially be weaponized and used in other ways that are against our will in the future. So there's a strong, there are some pretty key considerations that one needs to take in terms of thinking about Prop 20. And then there's Prop 21, which is essentially the local rent control initiative. And so, as I'm sure most people here are aware, rental housing is expensive in California. Renters in California pay 50% more for rental units here than they would for comparable units in other states. And so allowing cities and counties to limit how much a landlord can increase rent is really important. It's also important that one of the provisions in this allows for landlords to charge enough to make sure that they make a profit each year. So it's not as if landlords are being essentially priced out of their ability to be able to break even or even make a profit. It's just limiting how much of a profit they can make by raising rents. And this can actually have several positive effects overall for the state. One is lowering rent, obviously, which decreases then again the number of renters that relocate due to rent increases, which helps to stabilize a community and allows people to invest more in that community because they can actually stay there long term. It also then, can have the effect, and this is where I think a lot of people are concerned about lowering the value of rental housing. However, lowering the value of rental housing, given that we are 50% higher than other states, is not inherently a bad thing. And it actually could serve as a way to incentivize landlords to sell some of their rental housing to new owners who could live there, which then could increase the availability of long-term housing. Again, we have to be really clear that the cost of housing in California is a significant, contribution to our overall stability or lack thereof as a state. And so, without some of these policy interventions, there really is a concern that people will be priced into their own oppression. And especially in a year where, so many people have lost jobs, and that has put their housing into question, the idea of being able to stabilize the cost of housing when so many people are paying more than 50% of their monthly income on housing, which is something that we consider to be housing essentially overburdened. It means that you're high risk that if something happens to your primary income source of becoming homeless. And then there's Prop 22. And Prop 22 is what I'm sure many people have heard of as the Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash one. I've jokingly called this Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash spend $130 million to avoid giving independence or benefits. But this is where app-based drivers are treated as contractors, and it kind of overviews some of the labor policies. And so essentially here, Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash are attempting to exempt themselves from providing employee protections under the guise that their drivers are independent contractors. And their argument is that their drivers want to be independent contractors and are independent contractors, and that it's in everyone's best interest to keep this set up. But the issue at hand is not actually whether or not they're independent contractors or whether or not they should be. Independent contractors can, do, and should exist. The issue is calling the drivers independent contractors while exerting employer-level control and then refusing to provide employer-level benefits. So an example to illustrate the difference would be that if you purchase airline tickets through Orbitz or Expedia, the airline companies choose to be listed on the platform and pay a fee to be included, and they possibly pay like a commission if you book tickets through Orbitz or Expedia. But everybody is totally clear that Orbitz and Expedia are, that those are companies that engage with independent companies via contract. Dare we call them independent contractors? And Orbitz and Expedia have no control over how airline companies run their businesses. So there's really no need to treat, Delta or United as an employee. So what's at stake for Prop 22 is workers' rights. So it's really important to be clear on sort of what contractors do versus what employees do to see how Uber and Lyft measure up. So independent contractors choose which clients they work with and how, whereas employers direct employees' work, clients, goals, and outcomes. And Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash don't allow you to choose which clients you take. So you can't have repeat customers or recurring rides. So that would put them in the category of employers. Independent contractors decide which services they offer. Employers determine the scope of work and how work is completed. And so if you look at Uber and Lyft, they require you to have a certain age car to operate in a certain way. And so that again would put them in the category of an employer. Independent contractors are able to set their own prices, whereas employers determine employee compensation and pay scales. And Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash set the rates and prices. And independent contractors also can be as good or bad in terms of providing the services they want. And essentially the market and the customers decide whether or not they will keep you in business or put you out because they just won't patronize you anymore because your product is bad. Whereas employers evaluate employee performance, determine your promotions, bonuses, and terminations accordingly. And Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash kick drivers off whose ratings are too low. So there are lots of sort of ways in which Uber, Lyft, Lyft, and DoorDash exert controls that violate the basic premise of independent contractors. And they kind of look like textbook employers. And so there are a couple of ways that this could have been handled, right? One is for them to offer employee benefits to their, as right now, unclaimed employees. Or since by all accounts, they want the drivers to be independent, the drivers want to be, and the drivers want to be independent as well. The easiest way to solve this would be to loosen the reins on the drivers, a model that looks more like Orbitz and Expedia, to ensure that they're not inadvertently engaged in an employment relationship. But the truth is that Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash don't want to do that because it'll reduce their profit margin. So instead of finding an agreeable way to comply with the existing law, they want to change it for their benefit and have spent almost $150 million supporting this ballot initiative in order to do so. And they've also sued and threatened to pull out of California if they don't win. But, you know, there are, in the other places that they pulled out of, like Austin, Texas, co-op businesses have filled that void very easily. And you know, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. So, you know, the question of whether or not we should take those threats seriously is one certainly that voters should consider. What really, though, should raise serious considerations about a yes vote on this proposition is that this measure requires 7/8 of the legislature to vote to overturn or amend it if it passes. And there are very few times in the legislature that would mean both the Assembly and the Senate would have to have 7/8 of their members vote to be able to make any changes to this legislation. And so that, you know, is a major consideration, because once if you vote yes on this and it becomes law, it will basically be impossible to change any of the provisions. So then Prop 23, this would require dialysis centers to have medical personnel on site. And this is really important. So Black and Latino people are more likely to have cardiovascular disease like diabetes and hypertension, which leads to end-stage renal disease and results in kidney failure, resulting from kidney failure, excuse me. And so in this, Black people constitute about 35% of all the patients receiving dialysis for kidney failure, despite only being 12% of the US population. And so, you know, dialysis is a life-saving treatment, but the industry leaders are frequently overcharging their patients for care. And so there was actually a proposition on your 2018 ballot that would put a cap on how much outpatient kidney dialysis clinics could charge their patients. And it would impose some penalties for excessive bills. It also would have prevented these same clinics from discriminating against patients based on what type of insurance they had. And basically Prop 8 failed that year. And so that's why we're here with the sponsors coming back again to revise the proposal that attempts to improve patient safety, but is basically taking a less direct swipe at the outrageous and predatory profit margin in the process. So if this bill passes, the new requirement for dialysis clinics is basically that they have to have on-site medical supervision. They have to have improved reporting of infections and complications to ensure that, and also ensure that patients have access to care irrespective of their payment type. And it would then also require public health approval before closing or reducing services. The reason for this is because every time anyone has attempted to regulate this industry, they have basically said, if any of your regulations go through, we're going to shut down dialysis centers, which then scares people into wanting to regulate them, because lots of people, again, rely on dialysis multiple times a week in order to stay alive. And so that is really scary. And so one of the provisions of this is that they would not be able to shut down without getting public health approval first. It also would require them to have a nurse practitioner or physician on site at the dialysis center. The reason for that is that many of these clinics don't actually have appropriate medical personnel on site. And you're talking about people who are incredibly sick and who are engaging in what is generally a safe medical procedure, but certainly is prone to complications, especially because it's happening multiple times a week with people who are very sick. And so what's happening right now is that when complications arise, the clinics call 911 to respond, and then they pass off that copay for the ambulance ride, as well as any inpatient hospital bills to the patients instead of having to assume some responsibility for it because they were the ones providing the service. And they're also able right now to discriminate against patients based on their insurance type. So if you happen to have, the state Medi-Cal or possibly, and sometimes even Medicare, they are less likely to engage with you as a patient than if you have private insurance. And so this really is an important way of being able to consider, are people going to be safe when they go to these dialysis clinics? And you may also be wondering why the physician and nurses associations are opposed to this. You just need to know the background is that DaVita and Fresenius, who are the major dialysis providers, have actually paid membership fees for multiple members because those are membership-based organizations. And so this is one of the times where you have to take what they are recommending with kind of a grain of salt because of that. Similar to, you may be wondering why the state NAACP is opposing this measure. And the same questions, rules kind of apply, that the president of the state NAACP actually has a lobbying firm and is often paid to run statewide campaigns. And so the NAACP often takes the same position as her lobbying firm. And so again, while local NAACPs are doing a really great job of scrutinizing some of these, just take with a grain of salt what you're seeing from the state NAACP, as well as on this one from the California Medical Association and some of the nursing associations as well. Then we go to Prop 24, and this is essentially what I'm jokingly calling the pay-to-play consumer protections that nobody asked for. So essentially what's happening here is that they're trying to update the privacy rules. And it sounds really tempting at first, but if the proposition is passed, it would reduce the number of businesses required to meet privacy requirements. And it would basically create a pay for privacy setup to safeguard your information. So if you couldn't afford to be able to pay for your privacy, then your information wouldn't have the same level of protection. California already has some of the strongest consumer protections in the state, in the country. And so it's really important that we look kind of side eye at the provisions of this if they're requiring people to pay for privacy. The biggest beneficiary of this bill is also the tech and social media sector. They sponsored it, and the provisions ignore a lot of the key suggestions from the privacy and consumer rights groups. So just paying attention to sort of who is supporting and who isn't supporting this, because it essentially it could make some of the the key protection regulations stronger, but at the same time, it also would only do that if you were willing to pay for it. And so that's the key consideration, is not just privacy, but also who gets to enjoy privacy and what does it mean when people who can't afford to have privacy don't have any. And then lastly, that brings us to Prop 25, which is essentially bail agencies trying to preserve their businesses. So this would replace cash bail with a risk assessment, and this is a referendum on Senate Bill 10, which was passed a few years ago. We already know that the money bail system is unfair and unjust. And under the current money bail system, it effectively works this way. If you can afford to pay your bail, you can go free until your trial. If you can't, you have to stay in jail. So people who have more money go free, even if they're accused of serious crimes, and the people who have less money are forced to stay in jail, even if they're accused of low level or non-violent crimes. And so that money bail system really forces some innocent people to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit because they can't afford to pay a non-refundable fee of $5,000 or more to a bail company, and they can't afford to stay in jail and risk losing their jobs and their homes while they wait for trial. And so they end up with a permanent criminal record. And so this measure is a referendum that's sponsored by the bail industry to repeal the provision that would replace bail with a pretrial risk assessment. And they want to overturn it because it threatens their business model. It would effectively put most of the bail businesses in the state out of business. And so the thing you have to consider here is that there is definitely still work to be done to refine and revise the pretrial release program to ensure that the algorithms that they use to determine whether you get released or not aren't using evidence from the racist criminal, system to stereotype and justify pretrial detention, of Black and Latinx and low-income people. But removing this predatory, cash bail system is really urgently needed. And so that's the key consideration here, is that we actually need to move away from this cash-only system to a system that's actually based on how, dangerous potentially is this person to other people in the community, looking specifically at examples like domestic violence and other ones where you wouldn't want somebody to be able to pay to get out because of potentially the threat to the rest of the community. And so, this is one where you're really kind of thinking about racial and economic justice and whether or not you want people to be released from jail after accusation of a crime based solely on their ability to pay or not. And so that brings us to the end of your very long ballot. Also, those of you who are living in, the city of Sacramento or, may have additional measures on your ballot. So there's a lot to really consider this time. And that's why it's really important to let people know that it's not just, who you're voting for president that's up right now. There's a lot of ways that the structure and function of the state of California, and as well as your city or county, can be changed based on your vote. And so when people the comments that were made earlier from Dr. Dow and others, about the importance of voting, I always remind people that there are times when you're voting for the people who decide, and there are other times when you're the one who decides. And when it comes to these state propositions, you're the one who decides. So people like me who right now are out telling people how they should or should not vote on these, I am lobbying when I talk to anybody who is a voter in the state of California, because you are the ones who are going to be deciding on this. I'm not influencing, I'm not trying to sway the legislature by getting people to call in. I'm telling you, and I'm trying to convince you what we should or should not do. And so you're the decider. And so that's a lot of responsibility to hold. It's also an important role that we play in our state. And so we really want to make sure that we're doing it as effectively as we can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kofer. I think that was very knowledgeable by everybody. I appreciate your breaking down each proposition. We got about 10 minutes to go through some questions. So Chewy, thank you for the question. What will Prop 16 do as far as where we'll be focused?
Great. So that's a really, really great question. Prop 16 is going to be focused on education. So if we're thinking about the ways in which, in which we decide, who gets into schools, that's going to be one of the key considerations there. It's also going to be focused on like the government contracts that we get. So again, thinking about who is able to, is there a priority that's going to be given to the smaller businesses? For those, again, in Sacramento, one of the key considerations is like, we just had this huge Golden One Center that was created, right? And there's not a single Black restaurant inside Golden One Center. So for, time, for the rest of, the time that that business exists, who knows, if there ever are going to be any added, but that is certainly revenue that is missed out from our communities. And so this would require them to be able to give serious consideration and to have to, consider consulting with and engaging in contracts with, Black businesses and at the intersections of those Black women businesses or Latino women businesses and those sorts of things. So it's really important for us to really consider what the economic, result of that is. We've lost, as I mentioned earlier, $500 million a year in contracts because Prop 209 was passed in 1996. And that can't be understated in terms of the way in which that's impacted our community.
And this is not, and quite frankly, let me add this piece. This is not about handouts in any way. This is about balance, right? This is about absolute balance. You can't have a situation which systematically oppresses a group of people for hundreds of years and then turn around and say, you know what, we did this for about 10, 15, 20 years. Now we're good.
Right.
No. All we want is an opportunity to participate in the system. And going back to what Dr. Kofer said, the reality is you all can hold them responsible for the way that they vote and the initiatives that come forward. The reality is if you vote them in, you can easily vote them out if they're not doing the things that we want them to do. So it's a great deal of responsibility, and that responsibility is really in your hands.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I see I got 2 private questions. So one.
Yeah, I shared it. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of them was, why should the fire victims get a tax break? That makes this person want to vote no. Was this actually written for them? Does it include flood victims like those in Sacramento? That's a really great question. So this in particular focuses on fire victims, those who are impacted by wildfires in particular. But there also are there are additional protections that are in place in general for people who have been impacted by natural disasters. So again, we don't want to pit victims of one type of natural disaster against the other. We want to really consider like what's good for people who are in these positions. And there's always an opportunity if we feel like there's somebody who's been left out to revisit that, either through the legislature or through additional statewide propositions.
Okay, I had is it Miss Alex? Prop 15. Does it affect the individual tax?
No. So this is only on high value businesses. This has nothing to do with individuals. So if you don't own a business that is valued at over $3 million, this bill has nothing to do with you and will not change anything in your life.
And I had Elijah with a follow-up on that. Will the community suffer from these increased taxes to offset the product and the cost?
So the answer to that is, no, the community shouldn't suffer from these increased costs because they have been underpaying for so long and we've been overpaying. So if you're paying property taxes on your property and you've bought a house anytime in the last 10 or 15 years, you're paying your, sales tax, you're paying your taxes on your income, you're paying as a percentage of your income far more than they are. And they have likely, I'm just guessing on here that most of you are not multimillionaires, that, they have a lot more money than you do. So the idea that these costs would automatically be passed on to us is simply, not necessarily not true in the sense of they would have to pass these costs on. This is what the rest of us are having to pay in order to be able to live, and we have far less money than they do. And also just consider that places like Disneyland bought their property so long ago and have been paying such a low rate, and they make a huge profit every year. So this is not something that they can't afford to pay either. And this is not something that's going to harm small businesses as well. So if you're thinking about, the restaurants that that are, struggling because of COVID closures and things like that, this is not them. This is the very high value businesses in the state of California.
Thank you for answering, but my actual question was, will the companies increase the cost of their products in order to offset their taxes? Will that affect the community? And is there a way to, have a countermeasure for that?
Well, that's the folly of capitalism. That when we don't have, good consumer protections, there are times when they can do what they want in terms of setting pricing. So unfortunately, I guess we have to let the market decide.
Well,
okay.
Here's the countermeasure though. The countermeasure is your economic dollar. So the countermeasure is you choose to take your dollar somewhere else.
Yep.
The reality is the business will do what you allow them to do.
Yep.
So if you allow them to raise their costs and you continue to patronize them, they'll continue to raise their costs. Mm-hmm. But if there's another option out there, with a more economical, price point, then that economical price point will thrive.
Awesome. Thank you both.
And just as a reminder, this is not like this, these are high value businesses, but this is not, going to directly impact some of your basic needs, like, your utility prices and things like that are not impacted by this. So these likely are going to be businesses that you have the ability, as, Dr. Dow said, to be able to say yes or no, do I want to spend my money here? So you have a lot more of the buyer's control over what the market will decide.
I have Carl Brown wanting to do a recommendation. I told him that you would just go back over what's a yes and what's a no for Prop 1.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to do that, so I was kind of hedging.
Yeah, we'll just stick with what's a yes mean and what does a no mean, and so that they can make
sure.
this.
Okay, so if we do a quick rundown, Prop 14, a yes means that you want there to be bonds for stem cell research. A no means you don't. Let me pull up my cheat sheet so I don't have to scroll as much. For Prop 15, a yes means you want the commercial property and industrial property taxes to go up. A no means you don't. For Prop 16, a yes means that you want to have diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting. So in other words, you want to repeal Prop 209 and allow affirmative action to take place. A no means you don't want that to take place and you want to keep the system as it is right now. For Prop 17, it means that you are allowing people on parole to vote. A no means you don't want people on parole to be able to vote. For Prop 18, it means you do want 17-year-olds to be able to vote in a primary if they're eligible to vote in the general election, and a no means you don't want them to be eligible to vote. For Prop 19, it means that you want to change the property tax rules to allow those who are over 55 or who are disabled or who lost their homes to wildfire to be able to keep their property tax rates, and a no means you don't want that to happen. And then for Prop 20, a yes would mean that you want to overturn Prop 47 and Prop 57. And so you want higher penalties on felonies and especially nonviolent and non-sexual crimes, and that you don't want eligible nonviolent felonies to be released from prison when they complete their primary sentence. And you want people who committed misdemeanors to have their DNA collected. And a no means that you want to keep Prop 47 and Prop 57, meaning that you don't want people who have committed felonies to be charged, or committed low-level nonviolent, non-sexual crimes to be charged with felonies. And you do want people who are imprisoned to be able to be released after their primary sentence is complete. And you don't want DNA collection for misdemeanors. Then Prop 21 means a vote of yes means that you want to allow local governments to establish rent control on residential properties. And a no vote means you don't want local governments to be able to establish rent control on residential properties. And then for Prop 22, a yes means that you agree to these changes to the app-based delivery systems and transportation systems. So the exemptions from providing employee benefits. And a no vote means you don't want them to be exempt from providing employee benefits. And then for Prop 23, a yes vote means that you want the state to establish requirements for these kidney dialysis centers. And a no vote means you don't want them to require medical professionals on site and to have to get approval before closing sites. And then for Prop 24, a yes vote means that you want these consumer privacy laws that would only be in place if people are able to afford them. And a no vote means you don't want to change and add these consumer privacy protections that only allow people to be able to get them if they pay. And then for Prop 25, a yes vote means that you are saying you want the cash bail system to be replaced with the pretrial risk assessment. And a no vote means you want to keep the cash bail system and you don't want pretrial risk assessment.
All right, thank you so much for going through that with the yes or no. At the end, I will have our email address up. If you email us, we will send you a document that you can read that actually spells out what's yes and what's no, as stated by Dr. Kofer. And so if you're interested in that, at the end, we'll give our email address and if you just email us, say, hey, send it to me. We'll know what it is and we'll just send that document over. Let me get to one question here because we had about 2 minutes left. Does a yes vote on 23 really prevent individuals from attaining dialysis treatments? If so, how?
It does not. That is just one of the things that the people who are in opposition, that I looked at the campaign financing yesterday, and they have contributed about $80 or $90 million to try to kill this initiative, and it's mostly DaVita and Fresenius, so the two major dialysis clinics in the state. It will not prevent people from being able to get their dialysis, and in fact, if it passes, it would make it so the DaVita and Fresenius and other dialysis providers would not be allowed to close their doors without first getting approval from the California Department of Public Health. So this is actually in the interest of patients to make sure we pass this, because right now, every time somebody tries to come along and regulate the industry, they threaten to close down and say that they're not going to make enough money. It would also, again, make sure that medical professionals are on site for, again, people who are in renal failure, which is why you get dialysis, and making sure that medical professionals are on site to be able to attend to them. And it would also require them to be able to report the rates of infection to the Department of Public Health, so you could actually be able to look at key quality improvement concerns. So I know those commercials are playing everywhere, but I just encourage you to really look. The key thing here would be follow the money, because so often the money determines who's supporting things and who is against things. And so you really need to think about what their interests are and why they're contributing to or against something. And then I have a private question that came to me also, is who would pay for privacy under Prop 24, or who would we be paying for the privacy? You'd be paying essentially these private companies not to sell your data. So right now, I don't know how many of you have watched The Social Dilemma, but there's a really good quote in it. It's on Netflix, and it says, if you're getting a service for free, then the product is you. And so right now, any of the things that we use for free that we don't have to pay a price on, that means that they're likely selling the data that they get from us around our habits, around what we click on, around what we share, about how often we use it. And they're selling it to other people who can use that data to be able to make themselves money. So you would be paying those companies not to give your data out to other companies, which is why the entire tech sector is in support of the provision, because not only are they still able to sell your data if you can't afford it, but they also make money from you in the event that they can't sell your data.
Excellent, Dr. Cofer. I'd like to thank you for presenting to us this evening. We had a good amount of California voters, so hopefully everybody was able to gain something from your presentation. We want to encourage everybody to get the vote out. We want to encourage everybody to remain healthy while you're voting as well. Like I said earlier, to make sure you wear your mask, stay 6 feet away from everybody if you can. Wash your hands before and after leaving the voting location. Use hand sanitizer and bring your own writing utensils. This Zoom is being recorded. We do plan on having it on our chapter website. So if you want to go back and review what Dr. Cofer said, you can go to capitalcityqs.org. That's QUES.org. And I would like to again thank Dr. Cofer again for the awesome presentation, very informative. I want to thank Brother Dow for helping us present as well. And I would also like to thank the Roberts Family Development Center for their assistance with everything. And again, thank you all for joining. Have a blessed day.
Okay, I'm sorry. What is the email address that we send that information to?
The email is right there on your screen. You can check it out.
Okay.
capitalcityqs@outlook.com.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I put in the link in the chat for the Sister Circle voter guide. It's there's a cheat sheet which just has our recommendations, and then the full guide, which is about 40 pages, that has all of our explanations of why we've chosen to things. And it's also links to other resources where you can do a deeper dive into some of the topics on your ballot. So strongly encourage you to visit sacramentosistercircle.com/vote, and please feel free to share it with others.
Dr. Cofer, absolutely fantastic work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.